If you hold an A2 Certificate of Competency, or if you're thinking of taking one, you need to watch this video in full. Known in short as the A2 CFC and issued from the UK CAA, the certificate allows you to fly heavier legacy drones up to 2 kilograms within congested areas. Recently, the CAA announced that they have recommended an extension to the drone legacy and transition periods, meaning that you're going to be flying under the current rules for a good few years longer than we perhaps initially expected. Those of us, myself included, who have taken the test with a training provider were expecting to be able to purchase a so-called C-labeled drone that would allow us to fly drones like the DJI Mavic 3 much closer to uninvolved people. But as you probably know by now, this will not be happening at the end of this year, and the entire open category is potentially getting a review. So we should get used to the existing system in as much depth as possible. To this end, today's video is looking to help bring clarity to a subject I've seen discussed many times in posts and threads online. We're aware that the separation distance between your drone weighing between 500 grams and 2 kilograms and uninvolved people needs to be 50 meters. However, what happens when those people are inside a building or driving past in a car? You might be surprised by the answer. Recently, I discussed this topic with Callum Holland from the CAA RPAS policy team to gain some clarity from the regulator on behalf of the A2 CFC flyers. Callum, thank you very much for joining us yet again from the CAA RPAS policy team. Really good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
This is a subject matter which is coming up a lot more, and I think with the proposed extension of the transition and legacy periods indefinitely, hopefully coming up from the CAA recommendations, that's my personal opinion. I hope it happens. It's brought up an old subject matter which has started to appear a bit more online, because of course A2 CFC holders specifically are thinking, okay, I now need to plan for a bit longer without class marking drones and within the allowances that my certificate provides me now. One of those is, of course, separation to uninvolved people, which, of course, there is the 50-meter horizontal separation. And whether or not, if I'm flying my drone over a building, what kind of consideration I need to give to the people inside, potentially inside that building, and vehicles and that type of thing as well. Is there a catch-all response the CAA can give to clear all of that up?
No, I don't think there is, and I'm keen here that there isn't. We are not, the CAA aren't here to police every individual drone operator out there and tell them, within the bounds of the regulation, exactly what they should and shouldn't be doing, notwithstanding the regulation itself. We, as part of our responsibility, there's an assumption of common sense being applied by UAS pilots, recreational or commercial. And without that common sense, a lot of this falls apart. So, my appeal to the regulated community, as I know that they all already do, or at least the ones I've ever met, and I've met hundreds, if not thousands, apply common sense to every operation they do, whether it's recreational or commercial. We can take the vehicle one. People in vehicles are usually in them because they're going somewhere. If the vehicle is stationary, it usually means, well, they're either going to leave, which means they're not going to be there very long, or they've got to where they've got to go to, and they're going to be getting out at some point. So common sense there would imply that, well, actually, you're probably going to have an uninvolved person outside of a, let's call it, protected shell at some point very soon. So if you're operating around it, my appeal would be, well, common sense would dictate 50-meter applies there. Now, if you have a building that is full of people and you're at the back of it, not where there isn't an exit, perhaps, obviously the front door, common sense applies. People are going to be walking in and out of the front door. The back side of it, that's well beyond sort of 50 meters and all that good stuff, and you can reasonably anticipate that area is not going to be subject to uninvolved persons. Then I think that's an opportunity to apply some common sense and go, well, actually, I'm going to keep good situational awareness, as I would anyway. But I can reasonably suspect there's not going to be uninvolved persons within 50 meters of my operations. Move that to the front of the building where people are coming and going, and you have an opportunistic takeoff when there happens to be nobody coming in or out. That's where we're going to run into issues.
There is not a simple answer, because of course, every building is different, every vehicle is different, as you're saying. Every situation that could come up that could result in an uninvolved person popping up on your radar is different. It's important as well that and please feel free to disagree with this, that of course situations change in real time. So the fact that you've assessed that, okay, this is a row of cottages, there's no one in their garden sunbathing, there's no one, it doesn't appear that there's anybody out and about. The fact that somebody, of course, could come out their front door at any time, as long as you then take appropriate action, i.e. you change your flight path, you reinstate that 50 meters as soon as humanly possible, then that in itself is also operating safely.
Yeah, absolutely, and it comes back to the common sense approach and demonstrating good airmanship, which everybody I've met in my time in the industry has, and has. I think the important thing to remember is when we're flying, we're all of us are representatives of the community. Now, if we begin to find ourselves in a position where incidents are on the increase, and perhaps people are not applying common sense to their operations, and things are getting hit, people are getting hit, then we're going to have to see sort of a reevaluation of the provisions that the CAA push out. If we all act responsibly, of which the overwhelming majority of the community do, fly within the bounds of the regulation and apply common sense to operations, then it's going to enable us to maintain a much more open framework to enjoy either the hobby or make money commercially.
There's so many parts of folklore almost within UAS in the UK that get repeated enough on Facebook or on social media that people think that is now the rule. But I would assume that the size of drone you're flying also has a direct correlation from the point of view that, if you are flying a Mini 2 or a Mavic 2, or I don't want to say Matrice, because obviously you're talking about a completely different section, not even in the open category anymore. But the size of a drone, of course, is something that you need to take into consideration as well, from the point of view that if it is a Mavic 3, is that going to, if it drops out the sky, is it going to be able to go through the roof of that building and hurt somebody? Probably not. So you have that kind of protection side of things. Would you, again, this is just opinion, so feel free to say I'm not going to give an answer to it. Would you see things like trees and bushes and that type of thing as any kind of protection? So for instance, if I'm flying on either a park or a residential area, there's lots of people over here enjoying themselves in this park, but there's a row of very tall trees. Would that create the kind of barrier that I could reduce and not ignore, but mitigate against having to be 50 meters away from those people?
Yeah, so I'm keen to give sort of substantive answers where I can and not skirt around it. My personal view is that wouldn't fit within the bounds of a safe separation, foliage, as it were. Again, every flight is different, every environment is different. We need to see an application of common sense, the consideration of foliage, trees, unless they're specifically very, very tall,
yes.
I suggest probably wouldn't fit within the bounds of providing a safe barrier to uninvolved persons. And those rules are there not just for when everything's going well, they're there for when things start to go wrong. Although through normal operations, you can reasonably anticipate you won't overfly that set of trees. We've got to think about, well, what happens if something goes wrong? Could you reasonably anticipate that aircraft going beyond there into somewhere you didn't anticipate flying? And if the answer is yes, then we need to apply that common sense principle.
Exactly, and that's, again, something we always try and make clear, that the regulations and guidance has to fit a very wide use case of UAS. It isn't just a highly competent drone pilot that has complete control of their drone and somehow miraculously has a drone that never goes wrong. It has to be every use case that is covered by it. So and every potential risk and eventualities. That's excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
What do you think about that advice? Does it help make things clearer? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As you might expect, the advice is focused on safety and risk. If you're flying a drone over, let's say, a residential area and you can see that there is nobody out in their garden, or if you're flying over an office building where there is no movement of people, etc., A2 CFC flyers can therefore reasonably fly their drones over these locations, even though you don't know who is inside. You need to be ready and have a plan in place of how to bring about safe separation again, should someone appear. But this advice does make more flights possible in congested areas for holders of the A2 CFC. Comment below what your thoughts are on this. As I always say, be sure you are confident, because if anything goes wrong, it will only be you stood in front of the CAA, or worse still, a judge explaining it. But hopefully this gives you more flexibility with your A2 CFC. Oh, and here's a video that YouTube thinks you will like. Were they right? Sean out.